folks. Welcome inside the Paris Sea Palace, high above 2919 East Broadway. This is the Jake Feinberg Show. Thank you so much for making us part of your day today. My show revolves around the 4 L's: leadership, love, life, and lineage, and the ongoing story of real music made by real artists. The trendsetter, the one who is most authentic, trying to play from her guts and her soul the way her mentors did. She was part of the sterile universe of the 50s, growing up watching bands with striped shirts and acts, not real people channeling themselves, but an act. She pushed against the act by creating change. She went to Appalachia to find Doc Watson, going to find that Tennessee mountain home with Jim Keltner on the drum kit. This woman was not from the South, but her mentors were the Reverend Gary Davis and Mississippi John Hurt, who were, and because they were so authentic in their musical presentation, it rubbed off on my guest. To seek and discover for yourself has always been my guest's motto. Don't listen to critics or admirers. Dust off those rusty tunes that haven't been played for 40 years and play them with everything you got. My guest has played many songs over the last 40 years, but they're as authentic and fresh today because she seeks new beauty within and outside. Plant a seed, watch it grow. If it's not perfect or you flub a note, that's okay, because it's the gateway to further creation. My guest has sustained because she has continually adapted to the changing terrain of what was once a record industry. She maintains relationships with musicians she may not have worked with in many years, along with opening doors to younger generations of artists who get to learn from a trendsetter. My show is and has been dedicated to bassist John Kahn. I never knew John or got to see him play, but I have done my best to connect with those who did, and today I get to communicate with someone who knew him more than most. Someone who recognized his genius and enjoyed spending time with him on and off the bandstand. That is special. And what's also special is that I've come full circle with another iconic band. I've interviewed all the Jazz Crusaders. I've interviewed Dizzy Gillespie's band from the 70s. I interviewed all of the Jerry Hahn Brotherhood. And now with my guest today, I have connected with every jug bandmate from Jim Kweskin's group. That's special. And what's also special is that out of 400 guests, I can count on my hands the number of women I have interviewed. I need their input to shift the weight of perspective, to demystify the past and promote the present, to continually produce original songs and share the gifts that she received from her mentors. Time to send your camel to bed. Maria Muldaur, welcome to the Jake Feinberg Show.
Wow, what an intro. I'm floored. Thank you, Jake. That was quite something.
Well, you're welcome, Maria. That's my gift of these monologues. You know, they flow out of me in like 10 minutes. So
wow, okay. Well, I hope I can keep a pace with you.
My question is, Maria, did you ever get a chance to meet Duke Ellington?
I did. I met him twice.
Can you talk about that?
Sure. I'll tell you, the first time I met him was I remember this because Jenny was just a few months old, our daughter, and we, for the first time ever, we left her with a babysitter who just happened to be Mimi Farina, Joni Baez's younger sister.
Sure.
And Jeffrey Muldaur, my husband at the time, took me to see Duke Ellington at Boston Symphony Hall with Ella Fitzgerald performing with Duke and the band, and it was a show I'll never forget. And during the break, I went to find the ladies' restroom, and on my way, I ran into Duke Ellington and Clark Terry hanging out having a smoke in the hall. And I was, of course, floored and taken aback, but I mustered all my courage and asked Duke for his autograph for Jeffrey, which I then gave him. And then the second time I met Duke, he came to, I was by that the Jim Kweskin Jug Band, and we were playing a long stint at the Troubadour in L.A., and we got there early one night, and so there were only a few people in the audience, and we noticed right front row and center the distinct profile of Duke Ellington with his cool little ponytail, who had been brought there by Mo Austin, the president of Warner Reprise, which was the label we were on. And we all marched through the through the house on up to the dressing room. And I remember that we were all very excited, and Jeffrey was particularly nervous about the idea of Duke Ellington being right there front and center. And anyway, we composed ourselves, and the big question of the jug band, we were saying, should we do Mood Indigo? Because the jug band had recorded a very jug bandy version of Mood Indigo, and we argued back and forth, and then finally we said, we'll just do our show just the way we always do it. But we were a little more at attention, a little less goofy and zany during that performance, and I think Duke was bemused and amused by our presentation, and after the show he came up and met the band and was very gracious and wonderful, and he was particularly intrigued by Bill Keith, who was playing a pedal steel, a double neck pedal steel, and he spent a lot of time asking him a lot of questions, because I could see his mind was working and thinking of all the amazing harmonic possibilities in having two necks and then working it with your feet and your knees at the same time. So who knows, if he had lived much longer, he might have written a suite for pedal steel. You never know. So those are my two memorable Duke Ellington remembrances.
You know, I interviewed Bobby Hutcherson, the vibraphonist, last week. He's he can't give a lot anymore as far as answers, but what he did say about the African history of jazz, he said, you can listen to Duke Ellington records, but when he went to the East Coast and he saw him, it's a whole different ball game. George Duke, rest in peace, said the same thing. Clark Terry, rest in peace. You mentioned him as well. But
yeah, he recently just passed.
He did, and I guess what I'm trying to get at, Maria, for my generation and younger generations is, in your mind, what did Duke Ellington mean to music at that time, insofar as his leadership capability? What did he do as a leader that stood out, and what made him so compelling?
Well, you mean at that time in the 60s when I was coming of age musically? Or
the thing? Yeah, exactly.
Well, I mean, he was somebody the jug band listened to a lot, even though, jug band music sounds very goofy and rudimentary. Part of our particular jug band was very informed by a lot of the early Duke music, and Fletcher Henderson, all the early jazz greats, and he just had a way of his mind was so fertile. I don't really know what to say because I'm not a schooled musician, but his sense of harmonics and his whole sense of orchestration was so far advanced from anything. It's still advanced when you listen to it today, and he was a great band leader, and he knew how to bring out the best in each of the players. He would write pieces that would feature certain particular players in his band at the time, and he knew who to assign which solos to, and he was also, like you were mentioning, he very informed by the early African American
right
musical influences, and brought them out in a lot of his pieces, like Black and Tan Fantasy and Creole Love Call and all that. I mean, he's just a monster. What else can I say? Yeah,
no, it's well put. I know when I talked to Jeffrey, he was tickled. He really was tickled about meeting Duke Ellington, and I think that's classic to know that you guys were able to rub elbows as a jug band here with this, this incredible African American, jazz composer. But I actually want to go back for a minute and just talk to you about how superficial was the music of the late 50s to you? Was it superficial? Because ultimately what the jug band stood for was authenticity, the no shtick, as I've vetted with these guys. But I wanted to talk to you about your upbringing and why you wanted to break away from the sterility of the 50s.
Well, to talk about that, you have to start with my musical upbringing starting in the 40s, because at age 5, I was a little Italian American girl growing up in New York City in Greenwich Village, and my mom wanted me to only listen to classical music. That was her intention, that I grow up to be a very refined young lady. But her younger sister, my Aunt Katie, loved what she called cowboy music, which we would call country, the early country and western music. So at age 5, she was much against my mother's wishes and much to her dismay. She was teaching me, sabotaging my mother's best efforts by having me listen to country and western music that she tuned in from a little station in New Jersey. And we, so at age 5, I was listening to Hank Williams, Hank Thompson, Hank Snow, a lot of guys named Hank, Kitty Wells, and the first song I ever remember singing was Kitty Wells's "It Wasn't God Who Made Honky Tonk Angels" at the age of 5. So I had a very wonderful early start tuning into real authentic music, and that continued when I got to be a pre-teenager. Then I was listening to all the great R&B that was coming out on those stations at the very edge of the dial that that came out. There were several of them in New York City, so I was listening to Muddy Waters and Little Walter and Ruth Brown and people like that. And of course that music immediately grabbed my attention. I remember hearing "My Baby Don't Stand No Cheatin'," and of course then we had Chuck Berry and Little Richard and people like that. That was very authentic, compelling music. And at age 13, I was already had a girls' doo-wop group. But what happened was, by the mid-50s, then you had Elvis, who was very informed by Southern Black American music, and he was authentic as far as I was concerned. And then, of course, they tried to co-opt all that. They sent him off to the Army and tried to replace Elvis with Pat Boone and Fabian and people like that. So by the mid-50s, it really had gotten co-opted and watered down, and what was very vital, funky, raw, definitely authentic R&B music was just turned into teen pop crab.
Right. No.
And so as we emerge, and then the people that weren't listening to any form of rock and roll at all, our parents were listening to, Connie Francis and Patti Page singing "How Much Is That Doggy in the Window." So it got pretty insipid as the decade came to an end. And so when I lived right in Greenwich Village, which is where a lot of which is where what we now call the folk revival of the 60s, although my old friend John Sebastian likes to call it the folk scare of the 60s. But people in the urban north started discovering and exploring all kinds of what we now call American roots music, but they just called it folk music in those days. And people were listening to old recordings that were on Smithsonian compilations or Folkways records, and listening to Appalachian music and old blues and so forth. And we were very fascinated with that, because imagine how refreshing and organic it sounded after, years of being fed this kind of bland pap over the radio airwaves. So a lot of us got very fascinated with that kind of music, but when we listened to it, it seemed like these voices we heard and the people playing this music were coming to us from beyond the mists of time, from a very long time ago in a very far away place. But what people started to discover was actually a lot of the people that we heard on these recordings are perfectly alive and well and living down in the South, where most of this music originated, and people started bringing them up north and presenting them to urban audiences in the north. So that was very exciting for a lot of us, and we all just started immersing ourselves in I was in a Carter family duo with a gal named Annie Bird, who actually was from the South. I was also learning old blues, and the jug band was a synthesis of early country blues with some ragtime and early jazz, swing and jazz thrown in.
Talking to a legendary performer, Maria Muldaur. Such an honor to talk to you. Part of my show is, one of the L's of my show is life. And what I mean by that is experiential learning. And you can put on records but the story is that you went to go seek out Doc Watson. Could you tell the story about going there? Why you wanted to break that down?
Well, he was one of the people. There was a group called the Friends of Old Time Music that included Ralph Rinsler and other folk art, musicians who were hanging around at the time. And they were the ones that actually would go to the South and seek these artists out. So one time, I'll never forget, they brought Doc Watson and the Watson family up north and presented them at a concert at PS 41, my old elementary school, in the auditorium there. And I went to the concert, and I'll never forget it for two reasons, because number one, sitting right behind me was Ramblin' Jack Elliott and Woody Guthrie. And number two, the music was so beautiful. I was just totally transfixed by this pure, beautiful mountain music they were playing and singing, and all of it was great, but the part that really fascinated me the most and captivated me the most was the beautiful, simple, pure playing of Gaither Carlton, Doc Watson's father-in-law. So after the show, we all went to Alan Lomax's house, a famous collector, music collector,
unbelievable,
and archivist. And we went all over there for an all-night party, and I just went up to Gaither Carlton and told him how much I loved his playing, and said, gee, I wish I was all of 18 years old. I said, I wish you lived in New York. I'd love to learn to play fiddle like that. And he said, well, why don't you come on down to North Carolina, and I'll teach you everything I know. So I had the opportunity to take him up on his kind offer, and my boyfriend at the time and I got in our VW bus and drove down there to Deep Gap, North Carolina, and we stayed with Doc Watson and Rosalie and his family and his little son Merle, who grew up to be a fantastic musician in his own right. And I stayed there for a couple of weeks, and it was as different from living in New York City as it could possibly be. They lived up in the mountains. They grew all their own food. Every night after dinner, they had these amazing, the various relatives and friends from down the holler or up the mountain would come walking across the path and come over and sit on the porch, and they'd have like family musical get-togethers, and it was just an amazing experience for me. And Gaither Carlton taught me how to play fiddle, and I think I was attracted to his fiddle playing because it's very simple and pure and not full of a lot of fancy, flashy stuff. So it must have seemed something accessible for me to achieve. But anyway, I went down there several times, and it was an experience, of course, that was very much informed who I became as a musician, and an experience I'll never forget.
Did you take that communal?
Did I? I'm sorry, I didn't quite hear what you said.
No, yeah, I didn't finish I got to get my question formulated. Did you?
Okay.
Yeah. Did you take the influence of that communal music that you saw down there, and bring it to Cambridge? Because when I interviewed Jeff, I mean, he talked about, it was social music. I mean, he said he was totally anti-business. It was not about business for him. It was about people in a room playing music, which was really the Cambridge scene. But did you first experience that kind of community in Appalachia?
Well, actually, I experienced it in New York City because I ran away from home at the age of 17, but since I already lived in Greenwich Village, I didn't see the need to run but about 6 blocks away. And I ended up right in the very hub of the village on Jones Street between Bleecker and 4th Street. And at the end of the street, right on the corner there of 4th and Jones, was a place called the Allen Block Sandal Shop. And this is a guy who made handmade beatnik sandals. But every Saturday at 2 o'clock, he shut off all his sandal making gear and had an old-timey fiddle jam in there. And that's when I very first heard old-timey music. I had heard country and western music, but this is the first time I heard Appalachian music. And I was just fascinated. And I mean, all kinds of people came in there, including, people that were part of the New Lost City Ramblers. All kinds of great pickers would just stop by. The place would be jam-packed, and they would just be going at it furiously all afternoon. I know later on, a couple of years later, I know it was still going on for quite a while. I know Dylan used to stop in there once in a while, but that introduced me to a scene that was all about getting together and having picking parties. And then, of course, in Washington Square Park, every Sunday was like a mini folk festival going. You could walk around there's a big fountain in the middle of the park, and you could walk around and hear a little clump of people playing bluegrass, and then some people playing Appalachian, and then you'd go further around the circle and somebody'd be playing some Delta blues, and then jug band music, and so forth and so on. So this was a scene that was happening not just in Cambridge, it was also happening in New York City, and the other hub of it, the third part of the triangle, was Berkeley, the Berkeley sort of folk music scene, which was going strong, and it's still going strong now. Right. And so, the word music business didn't even enter my vocabulary. It was all about the fun and the passion of learning about it and sharing it with each other and trying to get good at it, and that was what we were all about.
Well, Maria, let's we're having a ball here. Let's take a break, and listen to some music, piece of music you did, and then we'll come back and talk about it. Okay?
Okay.
Do I care if skies are gray? It don't mean nothing to me. My man's home where he belongs, taking good care of me. Do I care if the rent is late? Rent don't mean nothing to me. My man's home where he belongs, taking good care of me. Oh, tired problems, it's easy to solve 'em when he's by my side. Funny, when I'm with him, I forget how I missed him, playing little boy and girl, husband and bride. Do I care if the door don't lock? We'll just let it be. My man's home where he belongs, giving sweet love to me.
Music on the Jake Feinberg Show is sponsored in part by the Stereo Hospital, with over 40 years of experience repairing all types of home audio equipment, from vintage table radios to digital surround sound. At 4044 East Speedway inside Metronome Music, the place to take your turntable, CD player, tape deck, just about anything to do with a stereo. Call 722-4610, and that's the number to call. All right, Maria, what do you got for us?
Oh my God, I haven't heard that in so long. That's from the from the Steelyard Blues album, isn't it?
That's, you're darn right.
Soundtrack.
The soundtrack, and the name of that song is "Do I Care" with Maria Muldaur just singing away the blues. I mean that to me was. Well, why don't you just talk about that, because you had some comrades that you were working with, but to me that's amazing stuff, and that's a hard soundtrack to come by. Tell me how that came about.
Well, that happened about a year before I ended up doing my first solo album for Warner Brothers. I think that was in the summer of '72. Mm-hmm. I may be off by a year, but geez, it's so long ago.
No, it's 70. You're right. You're right.
I was invited out. My friend Joe Boyd was co-producing a soundtrack with Nick Gravenitis for a movie called Steelyard Blues that starred Jane Fonda, Peter Boyle, I don't know. There were a bunch of kind of renegade actors, not the normal, Hollywood movie stars, were in this kind of quirky movie. And they had asked Nick Gravenitis to do the soundtrack. And so they called on me because they wanted to have different styles of music in the background and at certain pivotal moments have certain kinds of songs. And they knew that I could sing country. They knew I could sing like Dolly Parton. They specifically had me do that was their interpretation of a Billie Holiday style song. Most of the songs were written by Merle Saunders and, may he rest in peace, Mike Bloomfield.
Wow.
And so there was a 50s doo-wop song that Nick Gravenitis wrote. So I did a 50s doo-wop song, a Memphis Mini type song that I actually co-wrote with Mike Bloomfield. That one, which was the Billie Holiday one, and then there was a Ma Rainey one, and a Dolly Parton. And they did this because it was a lot cheaper to get me to sing all of that than to actually get licenses and pay those, artists like that for use of their song in the, on the soundtrack. So it was a great experience, and all my favorite comrades were on that project. Michael Bloomfield, my dear John Kahn, the bass player, Merle Saunders, Nick Gravenitis, and Paul Butterfield, to name but a few. We had a ball, and I haven't heard that in years, but I thought it sounded pretty good.
I thought I was listening to the other day. I said this is definitely on the rotation, because you were just on fire, and I also just love. This is more of a contemporary question for you, but. As a talent scout, Maria, as I posted the interview this week on social media, people said, hey, I know the keyboardist with Maria, or I knew this guy used to play with Maria. I mean, to me, can you talk about what you look for as a talent scout with younger musicians?
You mean as a talent scout for getting people in my band?
Yeah, I mean, exactly. Like, what do you look at, the intangible things that you look for in musicians?
Well, I've been blessed to just work with the best of the best, so my standards are pretty high. But having said that, I look for someone who's playing from the inside out, not from the outside in. That's where I'm coming from musically, and if you're coming from that place, it's not so much about how many fancy licks and riffs you play, or how fast you can play, or even how great your tone is. It's all about what your intention is from inside, almost like your spiritual intention, and also your ability, because then when you're working with people, making music with people who are on that wavelength and trying to make music from that place and with that intention, you can have a really nice give and take kind of conversation musically with each other. Like someone will play a little lick, and if you're open and you're listening to everybody else and not just busily thinking about what your next lick is going to be, you can then just a beautiful little conversation takes place. And I know when I listen to old recordings, that's the ones those are the ones you can listen to 500 times over, where there was like a real open flow of communication and musical exchange going on, and not like people, playing a set piece or a set chart by rote. It's not about, it should always be fresh. If you can find players like that, you're really lucky.
How do you, it's so important in the 21st century to communicate with human beings, and I just wonder, like, when you see somebody blowing too hard, or just it's a showing off chops, how do you pull them back? I mean, is it nonverbal communication? I mean, I think it's important that you talk about other forms of communication other than reaming somebody out or telling them something. How do you communicate with someone when they are overplaying and not in a dialogue?
And not what? I'm sorry.
They're not having
in the dialogue.
They're not having a dialogue.
Well, one form of nonverbal communication is don't hire them again, or I've become a pretty good band leader over the years, despite myself. When Jeffrey Muldaur and I went our separate ways, personally and musically, the last thing I was doing was thinking about, I wish I could ditch this guy in the band we're in so I could have my big old,
right.
my big famous solo career. I came to it kicking and screaming. I kind of came to it by default and just learned over the years. And one of the things I learned was not to be too bossy. Because, you have to give the person a chance to open up and start to play before you kind of gently correct them. And also, I just stand in the front, and if the drummer's pushing too hard, I put my hand behind my back and I make a motion like I'm drawing a horse. I'm trying to slow down a horse with the reins, you know what I mean?
Right.
And, if they're dragging, I play a mean tambourine, so I kind of help lift the music, the rhythm and the groove along by that. And I have a pretty steadfast sense of rhythm, and I can, even just me and my little voice and my tambourine, I can really help keep a band exactly in the groove. And then after the fact, you just say, hey, on that passage there, maybe just let me have that space in there, and then you come in and answer me. It's just a group effort. I just try to find people that delight in the dialogue, and I've been so blessed to have a great keyboard player who plays bass with his left hand and all kinds of keys with his right hand, and so he's like, I call him my right and left hand man for many years, Chris Burns, and he has a love of just playing in the moment and being in the dialogue, being in the conversation. He never overplays, and he's just priceless, as he's kind of the anchor of my band.
I don't mean to take away from his chops, but he adds enough punch. You don't need a bass player. He just plays bass lines.
He actually, yes. I mean, you always used to have a bass player, and one time we were out on tour, and our bass player, who's a fabulous bass player, Larry Fulcher, who's played with Taj Mahal and all kinds of great people, had to suddenly be called away because his mother had passed away, and we were in a panic, and the guys in the band said, listen, we called out for some bass players, and a lot of them responded, but most of them couldn't get there till Monday, and we had shows on Saturday and Sunday night. And so the guy said, hey, don't panic. Chris can play bass with his left hand. And I went, oh, my God, that's going to sound so cheesy. But I had no choice. Right. And after that first show, it was just a revelation, because he can play like Dr. John with his right hand, and he didn't overplay. He just was so in the pocket. It actually made more room for the vocals and for the other parts of the conversation. So from that point forward, I've just always preferred to work with him.
All right, well, Maria, we have another game on the show called Name That Voice. So I want you to listen to this voice, and then we'll come back and talk about it, okay?
Okay.
That was my introduction into the Jerry Garcia Band. I was doing some work with Maria Muldaur right after Midnight at the Oasis, and Amos Garrett and a number of those great musicians were working with her. And, of course, John Kahn, bass player with Jerry Garcia Band, was her boyfriend, and he sat in on bass a number of times at some of her shows. So, of course, we have rehearsals and we do some shows, and John Kahn is paying attention to me. And, after I think 3 or 4 or 5 gigs, they even came, him and Maria came to the church I was playing for. They just wanted to know more about me. They asked me where was I playing. I told them, and they showed up a couple Sundays. They said, "Oh, wow, look at them out there." Yeah, it was.
All right, so can you name that voice, Maria?
That was Melvin Seals, wasn't it?
You're 2 for 2. Well, 2 for 2 today. That's very good. That was Melvin Seals, a sweetheart of a guy. But I really would love you to talk about just going to see him at that church. Was he playing with you at that time, and you told John about that?
I was asked by another dear musical brother of mine, Elvin Bishop, whom I just adore, and he's a local homeboy here in Marin County.
I've interviewed Elvin, yeah.
And he was doing a show in Tahoe at a casino there, and he asked me to come and he was opening for Tina Turner. This was before her big comeback, and he asked me to come and kind of, as he called it, give his band a little class. He just wanted me to come out and sing a few tunes and just kind of class up their act. So I did, and that's when I first met Melvin, and he was just amazing. And so a little later on, when I guess when Keith passed away, Keith Godshaw, I had been in the Jerry Garcia Band with John, of course, for several years, and Ron Hutt playing drums. What a band. Huh. Anyway, so when Keith passed away, they were at a loss for what to do, and I said, I know someone who would be just fabulous in your band. I had become friends with Melvin and gone to hear him at his church because I love gospel music, and he's just a monster in every way. So I turned John and Jerry on to Melvin, and the rest is history. I mean, he played with them for a good many years.
Yeah, no, I was going to say, because the first time that you met John, was it during the pottery pie or the sweet potato sessions?
Yes. My husband at the time, Jeff Muldaur, we were making our second duo album with Amos Garrett was on guitar and Billy Mundy was our drummer. Bill Keith was in the band too.
Gene Dinwiddie, all those guys, yeah.
But Jeffrey who was a very particular and exacting musician, had gone through every bass player east of the Mississippi. None of them would do, and here we were. We kept postponing the recording and so forth, and so finally Albert Grossman, our manager, actually we asked Paul Butterfield, who was a good pal of ours, and he said, well, there's this young cat out in California. He plays with Mike Bloomfield all the time, and he's really good, and he can read, and he can play upright. And so they called on John Kahn to come back east and record with us, and poor guy showed up in a light jacket. Here it is, the dead of winter in Woodstock, 20 below. But he was in for a rude awakening. But he floored Jeffrey because he could play everything Jeffrey wanted him to play. And not only that, Jeffrey quizzed him on, he'd play him old Duke Ellington records and say, who's playing clarinet on that solo? And John Kahn would know. So Jeffrey was impressed and had him play with us. So that's the first time I met him. And then the second time was when we did the Steelyard Blues album. And then the third time was when my bass player took sick right when Midnight at the Oasis was starting to climb up the charts, and he showed up and in an hour learned 20 songs and played so beautifully that we told that bass player to go home, and we hired John. And then shortly after that we fell in love and spent many a lovely year together, and that eventually led to me being in the Jerry Garcia band.
Well, you just segued perfectly into the next piece of music. We'll come back and break it down. Take a listen. Christmas and Hanukkah have come early for Jake Feinberg today, getting a chance to talk to Maria Muldaur. Cats Down Under the Stars, Maria. Unbelievable.
Wow. That was quite a recording. My favorite of that is those Sodom and Gomorrah. There were some songs on there that I thought were just priceless.
I want to ask you.
Oh, I love Cats Under the Stars, of course, too. But there's a bootleg tape floating around that I guess they finally made into an album, which is our somebody recorded it at the Warner Theater in D.C.
Mm-hmm.
and it has "I'll Be with Thee" on it, and it was just a transcendent moment that I remember. Actually, when you're playing with Jerry Garcia, there's lots of transcendent moments, but I feel very blessed to have been part of that musical experience. It was quite something that I'll never experience anytime again soon, although I'm still close to some of the Grateful Dead family. But the way Jerry played was so unbelievably spiritual, really, that it was very moving.
You know what's great, Maria, is that you're right, that Warner Theater, I think it's March 18th, 4 days before that in Boston, on 3/14 you guys played, and that was the day I was born. What
band was that?
That was the Jerry Garcia band with John Conn. So 4 days, that was it was the Boston Music Hall, but on that tour, Jake Feinberg was born on that tour, which is just a beautiful thing.
Oh wow!
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm not living through my past here. I'm trying to go. I know these spirits, are the guy like John Conn and Jerry Garcia. They don't come along ever. These are special. Ron Tutt, I think Buzz Buchanan, but I just, Maria.
How could you get a better band than that? It was unbelievable. And John Conn and Ron Tutt were like, every once in a while a bass player and a drummer meet, and it's like they fall in love musically, kind of like Benny Benjamin and James Jamerson.
Absolutely.
And that was the case with Ron Tutt, who was, of course, Elvis's drummer and band leader for many years, musical director for many years, and he and John just bonded. They just loved the way each other played, and so for me it was heaven to stand in between them and play tambourine for 20 minutes while Jerry played Mystery Train or one of those tunes. It was just a rhythmical pocket that was kind of heavenly to be in the middle of.
There's I wish I was listening to this clip. There's a couple of clips when your band went on the road in '74. John, you played one gig that's out there at Ebbets Field in Denver, and there's a whole bunch of stuff off the Oasis album, but then the Chauffeur Blues, and who was your mainstay drummer with John in your band, like in '74? I forget his name. Who was that cat?
I can't remember.
Did you have a steady drummer at that time? Because in the
on that Ebbetsfield gig, I just can't remember that cat's name, and I can remember almost everything, but that was a pretty special. If
David,
you have live stuff from then, I'd love you to send it to me.
Maria, I'll send you. Listen, there's some most blazing. I'm sorry. I guess my question is this, because in the studio, like Keltner and Jim Gordon did those tracks, but obviously they weren't in your touring band. Did you have a steady drummer during that time?
Well, when John officially joined the band, which was after that Ebbetsfield gig, I had my band was John Kahn, Billy Mundy on drums, who had played with me and Jeff, but he's the original drummer with the Mothers of Invention.
I know Billy Mundy, sure, yeah.
And let's see, and then Jeff Gutchin played keyboard, Amos Garrett played guitar, and Steve Bruton, who recently passed away, another wonderful guitar player and songwriter from Texas, was my other guitar player, and they were quite a hot band.
And by the way, John, I will send you this recording. John's on bass at that Ebbetsfield show. It's unbelievable. It's quite a remarkable thing. Also, your first time in Los Angeles with the Queskin Jug Band, do you remember that experience at all? The first time you went to L.A.?
Yes.
Can you talk about that? Because, well, you talk about it from your perspective, please.
Well, when I was actually in the band, or the time I was just a jug band old lady and...
I'm talking about when the jug band was thriving. You went to the Troubadour, I think, to play for the first time, and Buddy Epson showed up. What was your...
Well, it was, back in those days, you didn't do one-nighters. We did 3 weeks. We did a 3-week residency at the Troubadour. And it was big fun. I mean, because you got to meet all the cool people in the town would eventually fall by, and I remember every night after our shows there'd be parties in the Hollywood Hills, people like Hoyt Axton and Roger Miller and all kinds of people. In fact, there was a young gal named Leslie, who was Leslie Jones, who was Spike Jones's daughter, and Spike Jones was out of town, and she had us over to her house for parties, and we'd get together, and sometimes, like, I remember at that particular time, Bob Dylan and Bobby Newirth showed up. They had just gotten in from the East Coast, so all kinds of people would gather and play music all night.
By the way, the drummer, January 30th, 1974, Bobby Mason.
That's him.
Bobby Mason. Do you still talk to Bobby? I mean, anybody that played rhythm, I mean, Ronnie Tutt, bless him, is gone. I still talk to Billy Vitt once in a while, but anyone that played with Kahn, I'm like, was Mason your steady drummer or no? Or he just filled in on that gig? He
was just on that one gig. He was not with me very long.
I'll tell you, I'm going to send you this show, Maria, because this is the show for blues is the most raunchy, on-fire thing. It's just classic. I mean, to know that, I think also the idea of being at a place for 3 weeks and be able to get loose, you really could be able to find your individual voice. And I admire people that say, yeah, I got 24 one-night gigs in the next 2 months. I love that. I mean, you're getting flown and you're getting treated well, but to me, it's almost, there's no opportunity to build any camaraderie, any chemistry, or develop your own kind of thing. And do you think that you were able to develop your individual voice because of these week-long, 2-week, 3-week-long engagements?
No, it's just, it's one big long gig, now I do one-nighters. And by the way, I don't know if you have my whole discography because we didn't have time to really prepare, but if you like that chauffeur, I hope you listen to the version I did on my Richland Woman Blues album. That was a Grammy-nominated album that came out around 2002, and I also re-released it on an album I did, which was a tribute to Memphis Minnie that I did with a bunch of other soul sisters in the blues like Bonnie Raitt and Ruthie Foster and Rory Block and so forth. So Chauffeur Blues has been in my repertoire a long time. I'm anxious to hear that version of it. But I would say I've developed my musical abilities and skills and agility just through doing it, whether it's a one-nighter or a 3-week stint, whatever it is, my goal is to always try to improve and to, to try to be there in the moment with the musicians I happen to be with at that moment on that night, and try to make it the best thing I can.
Can you talk about? I know you just did a gig with Mel Martin, didn't you?
Yeah, God, you know everything, Jay.
Maria. I mean, I don't blame you for not paying attention, but I've been pounding for 4 years. I mean, there's no joke.
Okay.
But no, I saw Mel was going to play with you, and I'm like, Maria's one of the most loyal, beautiful cats around, because I look at it today. I say, that community that was so prevalent, it was just there in Cambridge and before. Everybody kind of got farther and farther and farther away into their bubbles, and that's kind of what happened. But, just the idea that you can reach back and say, I haven't gigged with Mel in a while, but I'm going to put this.
I think you're before you go any further on this train of thought, you're thinking of Mel Lyman. Mel Lyman has been gone for maybe 20 or 30 years. Mel Martin is a very well-known sax player who actually was good friends with Benny Carter and worked a lot with Benny Carter in his later years. That I did, that first cut you played, It Ain't the Meat, It's the Motion. That's me and Benny Carter in an all-star big band.
No, I know who I'm talking about.
That was quite an experience. So the Mel you're talking about is someone I just recently met and started calling to do jazz gigs, because Mel Lyman's been gone for decades.
Wow. So I thought maybe you had crossed paths with Mel in the Bay Area, because he was part of Azteca and he was doing all sorts of wild jazz and I said Maria must have known him from back in the day. Just the mere fact that you're still scouting is just awesome. I'm still
gigging, so that means I'm still always looking for good players.
I did.
I've made 40 albums in the 40 years since Midnight at the Oasis was, riding at the top of the pop charts and getting Grammy noms and all that. And that's about one a year, and I usually tour behind the album to promote it, besides doing a lot of local gigs. And one of the reasons I love living in the Bay Area, I came up here originally to be with John Kahn, of course, but I've always loved this area because there's a lot of live music opportunities here, much more so than, say, in L.A. And so I tour behind the albums, and of course I'm always the most excited to perform the newest material for our audiences. But last year I realized that it had been 40 years since Midnight came out, and I thought I would celebrate that by putting together a sort of a multimedia retrospective called Way Past Midnight, and I toured with that for 7 weeks, and we're going to do it again this year. But the cool thing was that always wanting to present the newest material, I had over the years put a lot of people's older favorites on the back shelf there, and so part of the show was to go back and revisit a lot of people's older favorites that I hadn't sung in 20 or 30 years, and it's been just wonderful to revisit. It's like reconnecting with beautiful old friends to start playing some of these tunes I hadn't done in so long. So because I'm still always gigging, I'm still always looking for good players.
Maria, as we wrap up part one with Maria Muldaur here, I wanted to ask you two final questions. One, please talk about just a guy who really got the memo about being a human being, which was Mike Finnegan. And also, I would like you to address, because you got out of the chute. Yeah, you on 2 albums on Reprise, you had Vanguard, had the Queskin Band. You came out of the gate, instant stardom for you. And I would like you to talk to younger cats about how to handle that. So you can do Finnegan, and then how to handle success at an early age. Take it away.
Okay, well, Mike Finnegan, one of my all-time favorite musicians and people in the world, and what a monster he is, and so soulful. And this is talk about talent scouting. I was getting ready to go out on maybe my second or third, countrywide tour, and we had just a general call for a piano player, keyboard player, and he came, and of course he played fabulously, and so I was already thinking in my mind, oh, I like him the best, I want to choose him, but I thought, I've got to ask him, because there were background vocals required, and so I said, well, we really like the way he plays. I said, can you sing a little bit? And he said in his voice, can I sing? And he sat down and, ripped a great version of a blues off for us and just floored us all. And so, of course, he was instantly hired. And I have some of my favorite memories of being on the road in a band with him, Earl Palmer, Amos Garrett, and everyone in the band was stellar. And, of course, we had to give him his own spot every night in the show because we had to feature him because his singing is just a phenomenon in and of itself besides his fabulous organ and piano playing. So there's a guy that plays from the inside out and just means it 200% when he's playing, and always a joy to listen to, and one of the funnier guys I know and one of the smartest guys I know. So
I've never heard.
He's just one of many people that I feel blessed to have been able to share good music with over the years. And before your second question,
before you answer that, I just want to say. Is Sweet Harmony still part of your repertoire? Because on that gig in from 75 with Earl Palmer and Finnegan, Michael Moore was on bass, Ellen Kearney.
Oh my God, that's right, Ellen Kearney on guitar, yeah.
I mean, really, when I was moved to tears. I wish we could cue it up right now. But that with Mike on vocals and you guys, it just goes. And then Earl Palmer playing those gospel drums, just it's just unreal. Again, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Go ahead with the second part.
That is great. You should play that for people sometime because it's a song written by Smokey Robinson, and it's about the love of music and the healing power of music, and that's what I'm all about. So, and that's what music is all about. So to answer your second question, people ask me a lot, what advice would you give to young players today who are trying to make it? I never was trying to make it, as Jeffrey Muldaur said. We weren't trying to become big stars. We were trying to learn as much about the music that we loved as we could and to get good at it and share it with people. And because I was following a sort of a natural, organic path, I was blessed to have good things happen to me musically and to have, the fact that I had a huge hit, not just in the States, but internationally, that people still remember is just a weird fluke and a real blessing. But really, that was just one highlight of a 50-year long and meandering odyssey through various forms of American roots music. And I would say to people, why am I doing it now, 40 years after my big hit? Because I still love to do it. And you better really love to do it and not be doing it because you think it's a quick route to fame and fortune, because you'll have your 15 minutes on the top of the charts, but then what? If you're playing music that's just very trendy and in the moment, there's nothing wrong with that, but this business can give you so many hard knocks and so many slaps across the face that you better be in it for deeper reasons than just mere fame and fortune.
Maria, so much great content coming out of here, and like I said, I've not had enough women on my program, and I just am so happy that you took the time.
Yeah, you're going to have to fix that.
Well, I need some help. But what I'm saying is that this was a bridge, and this was a beautiful, and this was I hope we can do part 2 sometime later on down the line. It was really a beautiful time. I had a great time.
I did too. You asked very thoughtful questions, and I'm be happy to do it again. And keep up the good work. I feel very blessed to be part of the hallowed halls of the archives of all the people you've interviewed over the years.
Going straight ahead, Maria. So thank you so much. All right, have a great weekend. I'll talk to you soon.
All right, take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. We'll be right back.